and WNST. I mean, if you fell asleep in the third inning, you would have thought, well, 5-run lead, Ubaldo Jimenez on the mound. I mean, how can you screw that up? Well, Luke Jones joins us now, and we're going to do what we've been doing for 3.5 years. And Luke, you always say, let me sleep in on these days and just run the last time we talked about how and why Ubaldo Jimenez is still in this rotation. And I think Buck Showalter had kind of a hard time explaining that after the meltdown on Monday night against the Twinkies.
Yeah, and as I wrote at WNST.net, if Monday night wasn't the end, and look, this guy has had 9 lives because of his bulky contract. We've talked about it over and over. We know it runs through the end of this year. We know how much money he is still owed, despite it not being what it was, say, 2-3 years ago when we had conversations like this. It's feeling closer and closer to it's being the end, certainly based on Buck Showalter's post-game remarks. And Buck's never going to throw a guy completely under the bus. He's not going to just come out and say he's out of the rotation a few minutes after a game ends. But he said, if there are adjustments to be made, we'll make them. I'm not going to talk about it in a setting like this, but I understand it's a question that everyone's asking, including us, when we have any kind of struggle in any phase of the game. A follow-up question was asked about the possibility of Jimenez pitching in relief like we saw in 2014 for a stretch, like we saw for a portion of last year. And Buck kind of said, well, is that what's best for the bullpen? And went on to kind of, if you read between the lines, say, hey, we were able to do that in the past because we had Zach Britton and a much stronger bullpen. And
he was kind of talking you off the tree, right? Literally, right?
I mean, it was just, it was basically a case of he was indirectly saying our bullpen is not good enough and deep enough right now to carry a guy who, 1, does not have any minor league options, and 2, is not going to bring anything to the table from a value standpoint right now. You can talk all you want about guys like Tyler Wilson and Stephon Crichton, and look, that's organizational depth. Every team in baseball has bullpen guys that they're going to cycle in and quad A pitchers that they're going to cycle in at some point over the course of the season. Now, you hope not too often, and certainly the Orioles have had to do that a lot, but what makes those guys, what makes that tenable to have them is you can send them down to AAA. You can send them down to AA if need be, whereas a guy like Jimenez, he's just going to sit in your bullpen and only pitch in low-leverage situations, essentially blowouts one way or the other, and you can't do anything as far as sending them down to the minors. So all that being said, I'm still in a mode of I'll believe it when I see it, but it really felt like this thing kind of coming to a head after Ubaldo Jimenez squanders a 5-0 lead, and more specifically, in the 5th inning, it was the final 5 pitches of his outing resulted in 3 singles and a double. It was batting practice that third time through the order for the heart of the Twins order, and it was very, very difficult to watch. And on a personal note, as I noted in my 12 Thoughts blog, that after missing the weekend series because of a wedding, I couldn't help but sit there Monday night watching that pitching performance overall from the Orioles and say, man, if only my sister could just get married again.
Well, I mean, the wine was good, the food was good, so
yeah,
I mean, you relive all that. But in the case of the Orioles, I mean, so then Tyler Wilson comes in and looks like he belongs in Norfolk. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, that's kind of the way he and Wright looked most of last year. Dude, I survived Ken Dixon here, right? I mean, I survived Daniel Cabrera. I don't know that I've ever seen anything quite like this, though, right, where this has gone on for 4 years, this sort of a mistake signing and how much money was involved and, whether it meets the needs of the old man who runs the team to run him out there. One day maybe there'll be a book written on how this happened and why this happened, and but it certainly isn't conducive to winning baseball or confidence level amongst teammates, amongst the fan base, amongst the manager. But this is a weird organization in that way where if Mr. Angelo says, I'm paying him good American money, you're going to put – I mean, if that's really what's going on, which, there's a reason to believe that could be the case, that's why he's out there, maybe, because I can't fathom that baseball people have witnessed this over 4 years and Buck Showalter goes to bed and gets rest the night before Ubaldo Jimenez pitches?
Well, it just comes down to the idea of sunk cost. And, I mean, it's one thing. In 2014, when he lost his spot in the rotation in the second half of that season, remember, the rest of the rotation was pitching so well, and it really became a case of you did have a better option. You had Kevin Gausman. And 2015, pitched really well the first half of the season, didn't pitch so well in the second half of the season. I mean, that was the one year that he stayed in the rotation the entire time. Last year, there was the rumors about him being traded for Melvin Upton Jr. Remember that kind of a swapping of bad salaries. That never came to fruition. And now we come to this final season where he's still owed a sizable amount of money for the rest of this year, but it is only for the rest of this year. And you can keep going down this road and keep hoping that he's going to turn things around and at least have a stretch of time where
make him work for his money, right? I mean, but I don't. Okay, keep going.
No, believe me, I hear you. I don't disagree with you. But then you start to look at it and say, well, who are your other options that you feel can do a better job? And look, there might not be another option that can do a better job than what he's doing. But on the flip side, there's at the very least, you can't really look at this and say anyone else can do any worse than an ERA well over 7. So you get to a point where you say, a sunk cost is a sunk cost. It's nothing personal. The guy's trying. Talking to him in the postgame on Monday night, he knows he's not pitching well enough. I mean, it's not as though Ubaldo Jimenez goes out there and says, I want to go out there and tick everyone off and blow a 5-0 lead. But it just comes down to it. He's just not doing the job, and hasn't been doing the job for the better part of 4 years. And, how much longer can you go down this road when at the very least you can look at other options, whether it's an Alec Asher, even though if you look at how he's been handled the last 2 or 3 weeks, they've shortened him up quite a bit because they've needed him in the bullpen, and he's kind of become a meaningful piece for them out there, whether it's a Gabe Yanoa. I mean, go down the list. Any of these guys, at the very least, you can kind of try out some of these guys, and if they pitch poorly, what can you do with them as opposed to what you can't do with Jimenez? You can send them down to the minors and at the very least get another fresh arm that you can use in the bullpen while you figure out who's going to pitch 5 days later. So, like I said, again, I don't know if it's the end because we've seen this 9 lives act before, and certainly the Orioles have had an absurd amount of patience, however you want to categorize it. But it's feeling more and more like the end. And, Buck Showalter couldn't sugarcoat it. I mean, he's not going to disrespect one of his guys that he has a lot of fondness for personally, but it was very clear he sees what everyone else sees. And I realize the alternatives are not attractive, but again, when you're talking about a 7+ ERA, I mean, just how much longer can you try this? And again, I don't think the bullpen is really a viable option because they've had to cycle in so many fresh arms because they don't have Zach Britton and they don't have the strength and depth that they've had in their bullpen over the last 2 or 3 years.
He is Luke Jones. He has been subjected to many of these Ubaldo Jimenez starts. I don't know whether it's better at home or on the road for you. At least you get some hot dogs thrown in once in a while, maybe some decent weather and a night out and some pretty girls walking in front of the press box out there. But, for me, the worst ones are the ones on the road, quite frankly. There's no home booing involved. There's no internal pressure. I think he'll get the ball again. I mean, I don't think we've seen his last start because of what you said. I don't know who's going to come up and establish themselves any better in the rotation than him right now. I mean, if you're talking about Alec Asher, okay, I mean, I'll hear that for a little while, but they still have Gausman problems right now. I mean, they have a rotation problem right now, as we would have predicted back in February and March, and it's June, and they're playing pretty good baseball for the most part. I still keep going back to I think they'll hit the ball better before it's all over with, and I think there'll be more offense here. And I don't know what the bullpen situation has been good for a number of years, right? I mean, it's almost a little bit on borrowed time with the likes of the Brocks and the O'Days and Britton for that matter. They've had a really good bullpen the whole time Buck's been here, and part of that has been the way Buck has managed it, but They've needed to. They've never really had an ace starter. They've had to brag about their bullpen because they didn't have anybody going out there 7-8 innings every night, every fourth or fifth night, and giving them that twice a week, 3 times a week.
Yeah, and we've talked about this for so long in baseball. As much as we've seen more and more prevalence as far as how important the bullpen has become in the game, and we've seen this in the postseason with teams like Cleveland, teams like Kansas City, the Orioles in 2014. But what we also know about most bullpen arms, it's very volatile. It is very rare. I mean, you can point to examples like Mariano Rivera and Trevor Hoffman, but those are rare exceptions. Even if you're talking about guys that just had good major league runs in bullpens, it's tough to find guys that are really good for an extended period of time without having some bad seasons in there. It's just there's a lot of volatility, and how much of that is at work with the Orioles? I mean, certainly the health situation for Britton, even though he's begun throwing, even though Buck Showalter said Monday afternoon that he's on schedule and feeling good, basically playing catch, and that distance of that catch increasing, really since he started last week. But he's still a ways away. Still don't know how he's going to respond to when he actually gets back on a mound and starts pitching, at least in a minor league rehab setting, let alone at the major league level. But you go down the list. Aaron O'Day, he's older now. He's been dealing with off and on some shoulder soreness going back to last year. He had the hamstring issue, which clearly with a delivery that's as unorthodox as him, you need to be in great physical condition, head to toe, really, when you have those types of mechanics, that kind of an arm angle, that kind of a front leg as far as his sidearm delivery. Brad Brock, I think we all expected he wasn't going to be as dominant as he was in the first half of last year. I mean, if it wasn't for Zach Britton, we would have been talking about that being pretty darn historic as far as how he pitched April through about late July of last season. So just go down the list. I mean, Michael Givens, he's been really good at times this year, and he's struggled and has struggled here recently. And you can certainly question if he's been overused with some of those outings where he's been asked to log multiple innings. So it's not to say that I think the bullpen is completely wrecked or doomed, but it's really, as you noted, it's really, really difficult to be counting on that many guys to pitch that well for that long of a period of time. If your rotation is going to be an absolute mess, save for one or two guys at any point.
Well, you can blame Jimenez for the first 4 or 5 or 6 runs. They gave up 14.
Oh, sure. And look, I mean, here's the thing. Guys like Tyler Wilson and Stephon Crichton, I mean, they're not guys that you're counting on to pitch in meaningful full games, but the problem is their starters are only going 3 1/3 innings, 4 innings, 5 innings. 5 innings almost feels like a decent outing compared to what they've been getting from most of their starters here over the last 2 to 3 weeks. And what happens then? Well, you can't pitch your top guys in the 4th or 5th or 6th inning every night, so you have no choice but to run those guys out there. And look, Tyler Wilson and Stephon Crichton are making the major league minimum. Ubaldo Jimenez has been averaging $12.5 million over the last 4 years for the Orioles.
Well, Wilson, Crichton, and Blyer also began the season at various levels of minor league baseball 7 weeks ago. This was, we talked so much back in March, and the old days I'd sit here and do radio, and the guys you came north with were the guys you lived with. These guys will be, eating Franks and beans again at some point in June or July, because that's the way this shuttle works these days, right?
Well, they're going to be eating Franks and beans sooner than that, because they're probably going to need a fresh arm or two for the rest of the series, you would think, especially keep in mind they have the quick turnaround on Wednesday afternoon. Yeah. So, look, Tyler Wilson was put in a tough spot coming in with the bases loaded, no outs in the 5th inning. Him giving up 2 runs to tie the game there, you can live with that if he comes back and puts a 0 up with a clean inning in the 6th. And he didn't do that. He got knocked around, and before you know it, it's 12-6. So, it's unacceptable. But at the same time, what do you expect from quad A pitchers? I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, even some of the teams that have really good pitching staffs around baseball, you don't necessarily have guys that you're just cycling in when you need a fresh arm in long relief that are going to do a great job. You want to see it. Certainly you're chasing that, but you kind of get what you pay for with some guys like that. So I agree. It wasn't just Jimenez, but he's the one making making 8 figures this year, whereas those guys are making 6 figures. And you kind of look at it and say, well, that sounds about right. But it adds up to a really, really miserable night. And the fourth loss, or not loss, but fourth time that they have blown a lead of 5 or more runs over the last month. I mean, for a team that has been so successful over the last 5 years, despite talking about that small margin of error, talking about the fact that their lineup is flawed, they don't have a high on-base percentage, go down the list, the rotation clearly, save for the second half of 2014, has been bottom half of the American League over most of the last 4 or 5 years. But they've made it work, but aren't too many times where they've made it work when they're sitting there blowing 4, 5, 6, 7-run leads as regularly as they have over the last 3 or 4 weeks.
He is Luke Jones. He covers all things Orioles baseball. He was up in the middle of the night on Monday, and, of course, Buck Showalter. You can hear all of that out in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault, and the Orioles get back after it. I said to my wife as the game got going on Monday night, because she so enjoys watching Oriole baseball these days, I said, it's going to get worse for them if they don't win tonight, because they're going to see 2 real major league pitchers here. The reason the Twins are in this thing isn't really the way they're hitting the ball. I mean, Sano's been okay. It's nice to have your star player playing well, hint to Manny Machado. But, they got a couple of Irvin Santana was one of the other guys we had talked so much about the Orioles picking up and being a part of the rotation, and whether the Orioles should pay a guy like him or pay a guy like Giovanni Gallardo. And Santana's been a real ace for Minnesota. He's found a second life there. I think everybody knew that he had it in him in the same way that Jimenez had it in him at one point. And then on Wednesday, they're going to see Barrios, who is one of the really good young arms who struggled last year, went through that bad period, but has gotten off to a nice start this year for the Twins.
Yeah, I mean, Barrios is the guy that they're talking about in Minnesota that, can he be their ace? I mean, he's 22 years old. He has, and it's only been a couple starts this year, but off to a good start. And, clearly a really talented pitcher, former first-round pick out of Puerto Rico. And, he's really, someone that they have a lot of high hopes for. I mean, you mentioned Irvin Santana. I wouldn't say he's pitched like a true ace for them, but he's a guy that you can count on. He's off to a great start this year, don't get me wrong. But, over the course of the last few years, I mean, he had a 4 ERA 2 years ago, but he's dependable. He's a guy that you can count on that he's going to make 30 starts for the most part. And over the course of his career, has had 200-plus inning seasons, and you're going to get a good effort from him. And this year, he's been really good so far. But, it is funny to kind of think back to that January, February of 2014 period when there was a lot of discussion of whether the Orioles were going to sign Jimenez or Santana. Remember, Santana ended up taking a 1-year deal with the Braves and, did a nice job for Atlanta that season. And the Orioles, well, they got Ubaldo Jimenez, and we've seen how that's turned out. So who knows? Maybe if the Orioles had given Santana 4 years, $50 million, maybe that would have gotten the job done for him, or maybe a little bit more than that would have sealed the deal, and we'd be talking about a much different story. But pretty obvious how that's played out over the last 3 or 4 years. Santana been rock solid. He's not an ace, but he's a guy that you can just generally count on. And Ubaldo Jimenez, earlier in his career, he was that guy for a few seasons, in Colorado, and certainly his final half of the season at Cleveland that kind of put him in the position to get the contract he did from the Orioles, but very clear how that one's worked out. So, it's not going to be easy for the Orioles. I guess the one saving grace, Dylan Bundy going to the Hill for Game 2, and Chris Tillman had a pretty solid outing his last time out against the Blue Jays last Friday night. So you really hope he can build on that, because certainly going up against Barrios, you would think offense not going to be as easy to score 7 runs in either of these games. And as much as we were talking about the offense a couple weeks ago, that group has picked it up here recently, and problem is the pitching has been that much worse.
Well, at least no one got arrested. At least for the. Look, I'm looking for Ravens news around here, and I know they're going to meet the media on Thursday, and we got our OTAs, and they're throwing the ball around, and they're excited, and John's excited and all that stuff, but Boy, the Matt Elam, the afterglow, sort of the stench after the fart. Another arrest. It doesn't. I don't want to say it reflects upon the Ravens, but it does reflect upon the Ravens, right?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's tied to them. I mean, it's the same thing any team deals with. New England with Aaron Hernandez. I mean, we talked about that saga for years, but in the case of Matt Elam, this has gone so far beyond now just being a failure on the field. I mean, this is a guy who, second arrest in less than 3 months. If his NFL career wasn't toast after the drug charges back in February, when the Ravens came out with a statement later in the day that basically saying Matt Elam already wasn't in our plans for 2017, and they kind of left it at that. You'd have to think, especially with this one, being a domestic battery, an argument with his girlfriend, trying to take away her cell phone. They were rolling around on the ground. It doesn't sound like she was seriously hurt, thankfully. But
doesn't sound like he saw the Ray Rice video.
This is a guy who clearly, and he even told police he was asking her for money. So, what has this guy done? And look, I realize he didn't get the first-round pick money like we saw 7, 8, 9 years ago, but he still got, he got millions of dollars from the Ravens, and to think that he's at a point where he's asking his girlfriend for money.
Dude, well, one thing we would say about him universally, especially now that he's gone, was he wasn't a very smart guy. And I don't know how he walks in to the Combine in Indianapolis or visits the building and rolls around, and they felt like he was smart enough to be a first-round draft pick because, you could say what you want about Terrell Suggs' intellect, and that's been a question for me for 13 years. And I know not all of them can be honor scouts, as they like to say, or choir boys. We're not paying them to be choir boys. That's what's said behind closed doors, but I never felt like he was a particularly intelligent individual, and I think you eliminate football from that, and then you get real life, and this is Matt Elam. I mean, he's been arrested twice in the last 4. I've been 48 and a half years on the planet. I've done stuff I could have been arrested for, but I've never been arrested.
Yeah, and I made the same point to someone else. I was talking to someone in the press box talking about Matt Elam, and the point you just made is what I mentioned. I mean, for as much as the Ravens long term, now we've talked about the last few years, but long term. Have such a good history with the draft. It is kind of amazing. And look, you can go back and look at the end of the 2013 draft and early in the second round, and you can see some other guys who did not work out whatsoever that were similar in terms of guys that would have been on the draft board. But it's tough to think that the Ravens brass, that their scouts, anyone who did work on Matt Elam was impressed by who he is, who he's proved himself to be off the field. I mean, it's just, and look, I don't need to pile on the guy. Clearly failed with the Ravens. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Dude, that was a cruddy draft, man. I'm looking back through the first round of that thing. I mean,
Yeah, right. So, but even so, you look at, who he was even from, kind of day one, just, with our limited interactions as a group of media. But, you just look at it, and I hope the best for him, quite frankly, because it doesn't seem like, needless to say, he's not going down a good path right now. Put the NFL part of it on the side right now. I mean, if he's ever going to get another chance, I'm certainly skeptical of that after this second arrest.
Dude, we could have had Geno Smith in that draft with the 39th pick.
Exactly. I mean, and that's the thing, and that's not to excuse the Ravens either, because there were other good football players taken after him. But at the same time,
Le'Veon Bell was taken with the 48th pick.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just going through. Jamie Collins, who by the way Belichick gave away, was taken with the 52nd pick. Arthur Brown. Oh, that's right. He was taken with the 56th pick. Yeah. By the way, dude, I'm rolling through those first 2 rounds. It's about as stinker a draft as you could possibly. It's been a long time since I've looked at the 13 draft. I mean, Eric Fisher was the number 1 pick. Luke Jokel, Deion Jordan, Lane Johnson, Ziggy Ansah, Barkevius Mingo, Jonathan Cooper, Tavon Austin, D. Milliner. I mean, I'm going through the top 10 here, dude. It was PU. I mean, woo. I mean, I don't even see anybody here I'd want. Tyler Eifert was 21st. It's bad. Xavier Rhodes, I remember everybody wanted him. He was taken 25th. He would have been a nice pick, but bad draft all the way around.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there's a handful of guys from that top 25 that you say, okay, good player, but there's a lot of bad players in there, and it gives you a little more context to that pick for the Ravens, but still doesn't dismiss the reality that was a major bust. The worst defensive player by far that they've taken in the first round in the history of the franchise. And, I guess Kyle Bowler is the only other guy that you could talk about in terms of what it meant to the organization as far as a first-round bust. Certainly Kyle Bowler, good soldier, was a good teammate, worked hard, but very clearly, I think, our good pal Brian Billick would be the first to say, well, if Kyle Bowler wasn't such a failure, then he might still be the coach in Baltimore. Who knows? But certainly the Matt Elam saga takes another step in an unfortunate direction on Monday. And like I said, I don't wish the guy. I don't need to pile on any more than anyone else is. It's clear what the guy was in Baltimore. It was a bust. But now you really start to wonder what kind of path this guy's going down just from quality of his own.
I have a feeling we haven't seen the last headline, right?
I hope not. I hope that's not the case. I hope someone learns his lesson. But it's tough to disagree with that notion.
He is Luke Jones. He will be at Oriole Park at Camden Yards on the evening and on the afternoon as the Orioles wrap up this 3-game series with the Minnesota Twins. I almost said Vikings because the score was 14-7. And your tweets got me in that direction. They're headed off to Houston this weekend, and they're aces on the DL as of the weekend in Keuchel, so won't see Keuchel this weekend. You can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world at 7 a.m. each and every morning. Our morning newspaper hits your email inbox. It's all brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. If there's any breaking news, and there shall be, pitching moves back and forth to Norfolk, and the express train continues here with Quad A pitchers. You'll get that first on the WNST tech service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. Streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.